A radish utilized as a tool of anatomical vengeance, a death sentence for craving a morning latte, and a man sewn into a leather bag with a frantic monkey and a venomous snake. These aren't just dark myths, they are the literal, documented receipts of human justice. Today, we're looking back at 10 historical penalties so breathtakingly stupid and creatively cruel, you will seriously question how our ancestors found the time to invent the wheel between sessions of professional torture. Number 1. The tithing man's pole of duality. In the strict wooden bench reality of colonial American churches, a 2-hour sermon was a test of physical endurance. If your eyelids betrayed you and you drifted off, you didn't just wake up to a polite cough, you woke up to a specialized law enforcement tool. Every church employed a tithing man, an official whose entire career was dedicated to being the human equivalent of an alarm clock. The tithing man carried a long wooden pole that functioned as a bizarre binary system of discipline. If a man nodded off, the official used the business end, a heavy, blunt wooden knob. He would deliver a sharp, ringing crack directly to the man's skull. Just a solid, unapologetic bonk to the brain. However, hitting a lady was considered a social sin, so for the women he would flip the pole to reveal a soft, fluffy foxtail. He would then lean in and gently tickle the woman's nose or neck until she sneezed or giggled back to consciousness. It remains the most absurdly gendered law enforcement tool in history, blunt force trauma for the brothers and a spa-like feather caress for the sisters. Number 2. The radish of retribution. Ancient Athens is often hailed as the cradle of democracy and philosophy, but it was also the cradle of some very specific agricultural revenge. If a man was caught in an affair with another man's wife, he didn't just face a fine, he faced raphinidosis. This punishment involved a large raw radish, a vegetable that usually minds its own business in a salad. In a display of poetic justice, the aggrieved husband was legally permitted to take that radish and insert it where the sun rarely shines on a Greek citizen. To add a layer of extra sting, it would often follow the vegetable with a coating of hot ash. It forces you to imagine the first betrayed husband in history who, instead of reaching for a bronze sword, looked at his garden and thought, "Fetch me the largest root vegetable we have. I have a point to make." It stands as the most aggressively botanical form of humiliation the world has ever witnessed. Number 3. The social ghost of the Vikings. The Vikings are famous for their axes, but their most devastating weapon was actually a sentence of outlawry. In a society built entirely on the foundation of personal honor and family bloodlines, being declared an outlaw was a fate worse than a quick death. It was total social annihilation. The moment those words were spoken, you were legally transformed into a non-human entity. Your property was confiscated, your family was legally barred from giving you a crust of bread, and the outlawry status meant that literally anyone in the territory could kill you on sight for fun, without ever being charged with a crime. You weren't a person, you were a wolf in a holy place. You became a living phantom, a human target wandering the frozen wilderness, knowing that every stranger on the path was a potential executioner who could murder you just to claim they did. It turned every human being on Earth into a state-sanctioned bounty hunter. Number 4. The permanent billboard of the Nile. The ancient Egyptians viewed the spoken word as a sacred force that maintained the balance of the universe. Consequently, perjury, lying under oath, was considered a direct biological attack on the gods. Their solution wasn't a prison cell, it was a permanent physical edit of your face. Executioners would use a blade to slice off your nose and both of your ears. The logic was chillingly simple. If you use your face to broadcast lies, you no longer deserve a complete face. You became a walking, breathing advertisement of your own dishonesty. For the rest of your life, you couldn't buy a loaf of bread or walk through a market without every single person knowing exactly what you had done. You were physically disqualified from credibility, a human billboard of shame that could never be taken down. Number 5. The slow-motion horror of the boats. Ancient Persia wins the prize for the most psychologically and biologically nightmarish execution ever devised, scathism, or the boats. The victim was placed inside the hull of a narrow boat with another boat clamped on top, leaving only their head and limbs exposed like a human sandwich. Then the psychological warfare began. They were force-fed a nauseating slurry of milk and honey until they developed explosive, uncontrollable diarrhea, which remained trapped inside the boat with them. Then they slathered the victim's exposed skin in more honey and set them adrift in a swamp under a baking sun. Every insect for miles, flies, wasps, and beetles, would swarm the boat. They didn't just eat the honey, they began to lay eggs and nest inside the victim's flesh, devouring them from the inside out while they were still conscious. It wasn't a death sentence, it was a slow, agonizing transformation into a living, suffering insect colony. Number 6. The sewage-surfing baker. In the medieval era, bread was the literal fuel of survival. If a baker tried to scam the public by selling short-weight loaves, loaves that were smaller than the legal standard, the town didn't waste time with a lawsuit. They turned the baker into a public float. They would strap the dishonest baker to a wooden sled, hang the tiny, pathetic loaf of bread around their neck like a medal of shame, and drag them through the streets. Now remember, medieval streets were the town's primary drainage system for animal waste, garbage, and human contributions. The baker was dragged face first through a literal river of filth. The message was loud and clear. If you try to cheat the city out of its flour, the city will personally introduce your face to its most disgusting bodily fluids. It was the ultimate dirty business. Number 7. The barnacle grater of the sea. Life on a 17th century warship was already a nightmare, but keel hauling was the deepest circle of nautical hell. If you committed a high crime at sea, the crew would tie a rope around you, throw you over the side, and drag you underneath the ship's hull, across the entire width of the vessel, and back up the other side. If you were lucky, the water filled your lungs and it was over. But if you survived the suffocation, you had to deal with the grate. The underside of any long-distance ship was a jagged, razor-sharp forest of barnacles and shells. As you were dragged against the hull, these shells acted like a giant underwater cheese shredder, slicing your skin to ribbons. You went into the water a sailor and emerged as something that looked like raw ground beef. It was the punishment that combined the terror of drowning with the sensation of being skinned alive. Number 8. The Sultan's Coffee Crusade. In the 17th century Ottoman Empire, the war on drugs started with your morning cup of joe. Sultan Murad IV had an almost supernatural hatred for coffee. He believed it encouraged people to sit around and talk about politics, which is never good for a dictator. He outlawed coffee and made the penalty for a second offense death by beheading. But he didn't just trust his guards. Murad IV would famously dress up in the clothes of a commoner and prowl the dark alleys of Istanbul, personally looking for the smell of roasting beans. If he caught you with a cup, he didn't call for a trial. He often carried out the execution himself, right there on the street. It was history's most lethal coffee run. He was the supreme ruler of a vast empire, playing a high-stakes game of gotcha with a warm beverage. Number 9. The Roman Sacks of Chaos. For the crime of parricide, killing your own father or mother, the Romans designed pone cully, a punishment so bizarrely specific it feels like it was written by a madman. After being beaten with blood-red rods, the killer was sewn into a massive waterproof leather sack. But the Romans didn't want you to be bored in there. They would toss in a live dog, a rooster, a venomous snake, and an angry monkey. The idea was that as the sack hit the water, the animals would panic and begin fighting each other and the prisoner in total darkness. The entire writhing, screaming, biting, and crowing bag was then hurled into the Tiber River. It's the kind of creative madness that makes you wonder about the Roman legal committee meeting where someone shouted, "The snake is great, but what if we added a monkey for flavor?" Number 10. The single-man tax and the festival ban. Roman Emperor Augustus was the ultimate meddling parent. He decided that the empire's greatest threat wasn't barbarians, but bachelors. He viewed single men as selfish drains on society who were failing to produce the next generation of Roman soldiers. So he passed the Lex Papia Poppaea, which was essentially a direct attack on being single. If you were a man of marriageable age without a wife, you were hit with a massive bachelor tax. You were also barred from receiving inheritances from anyone but your closest relatives. But the real kicker? You were legally banned from attending the public games, festivals, and theater performances. In a world without the internet or TV, he literally banned single men from the only entertainment that existed. It was the historical equivalent of the government taxing your income and blocking your Netflix account because you haven't been on a date in 6 months. If history proves anything, it's that humanity has a terrifying capacity for creativity when it's time to be mean. We've used root vegetables as weapons, barnacles as graters, and monkeys as executioners. We've turned our neighbors into public displays and our morning coffee into a capital crime. We didn't just punish people, we made a theater out of it.